Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Frans de Waal. Frans is a Dutch-American biologist. His passion is primate behavior and the comparison between primate and human behavior. He enjoys looking at human society through the lens of a primatologist, and he is the author of 16 books, if my count is correct. And today we will speak about his latest book, Different: Gender Through the Eyes of a Primatologist. Frans, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
So Frans, well, I went through all your, to the title of your 16 books. I can see that they are mostly devoted to primates, the bonobos, the chimpanzees, our interaction with all of them. But I wonder if we could start by you telling us a little bit about your background. First of all, you are Dutch, and how is it that you ended up here? And then how is it that you became an expert in this field of expertise?
Yeah, I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm a biologist by origin and work on animals, animal behavior. And more specifically, I work on primates, chimpanzees, bonobos, which are our two closest relatives. And I've always been mostly interested in, let's say, intelligence and social behavior and the emotions of animals. So it's behavioral studies. I don't do medical studies or that kind of things. It's behavioral work. So it's more the psychology of the primates.
And is this why were you interested in this field, in chimpanzees and bonobos? I mean, you had such a huge field, and I do see that you study other mammals, you study elephants, and I mean, the variety of your story is extensive, but I see the majority of your book have been in this particular sector.
Yeah, most of my work is on the primates. I've done a few things on birds and elephants and that, but I'm mostly interested also in human behavior. So humans are also primates, and I think it's fairly easy to extend from the chimpanzee to the human, much easier than, let's say, from a wasp to a human or a fish to a human. So we are closely related to the primates, and that's my interest also.
Okay, well, and then this book in particular, you are putting a spotlight on the difference of gender. Why gender?
It's because each time I talk about sex differences in the primates, I say, for example, that females have more empathy. I'm very interested in empathy. Females have more of that than the males, or that the males are very, very interested in status and territory and things like that. People want to know more about that because it's clearly that people are struggling in the gender discussion about which part of gender is biological, which part is cultural. So we sometimes, the most extreme position, some people say gender is all in your head, gender is what you make of it, and so it's all cultural. And the other extreme is, of course, people who say men and women are always different, and they will always be different, and that's like natural, So there's two extreme positions, and people don't know where they fall, where to go with it, and then they hope that as a primatologist, I can give the answer to that.
Okay, well, first of all, since I know very little about chimpanzees and bonobos, I mean, to my own expert eye, they all look the same. So can you please highlight what are the differences between one and another one?
Oh, they are very different. So it's so interesting that we have two close relatives which are equally close. We are not monkeys. Monkeys is something else. Monkeys have tails, are smaller generally. We are apes. And apes, in French, you say grand singe. We have words for that. The apes is a special category. They are large tailless primates. And the two closest that we have, you also have gorillas and orangutans, but the two closest are chimpanzees and bonobos. And they look a bit alike, chimps and bonobos, to the point that long ago people even confused the two species. They lumped them together. But the bonobo is more elegant, has longer legs, like humans. They have longer legs, and they are a little bit smaller than the chimpanzee. And they are socially, in their behavior, they're very, very different. So chimpanzees are quite violent and aggressive and very dominance-oriented, and the males are dominant over the females. The bonobos is the opposite. The bonobo is very peaceful, is very sexy. There's a lot of sexual interactions in the bonobo, and the females are dominant over the males. Collective dominance by the females over the males. And so they are a friendlier, more peaceful species. And so we have these two extremes. We have a fairly violent male-oriented species and a fairly peaceful female-oriented. So for a gender discussion, that makes it a very interesting comparison, because people sometimes say men are naturally dominant over women. And if you don't look at the primates, they look at monkeys, let's say, where that's very often the case. But if you look at our two closest relatives, it's not so simple. We have two close ones where one is the male's dominant, the other the female's dominant.
And we say that if we are in the middle, and if we are we more related to the chimpanzees or to the bonobos, or has it changed in time? For example, I could see us in the prehistoric time that we were more violent maybe, and then with time we have been domesticated and we are more bonobo-like. Would that be a fair comparison?
Yeah, I find that problematic, because we are genetically exactly equally close to them. From the genes perspective, there's no reason to pick one or the other. Anatomically, we are a bit closer to the bonobo, I would say. But, we have elements of both of them. We are fairly violent as a species, I think. We are also very sexy as a species. We're very interested in sex. We don't always talk about sex, because especially in the American culture, people are very shy about it. So they don't always talk about it, but we are a very sexy species also. And so we have these elements in common with them.
And okay, so, and how are our gender, the human gender, is similar to the gender of the chimpanzees or to the bonobos, and how are we different?
Well, again, gender is an interesting concept, because gender, we usually distinguish sex and gender. All animals have sexes, two sexes, mostly two sexes. And people say only humans have genders. And the reason that they say that is that because gender is a cultural thing. Gender is related to the expectations and the norms and your education and your culture. And so people say animals have no gender. But I don't agree with that, because chimpanzees and bonobos, they learn a lot of things also in their life. And so they also learn about how to behave as a male or how to behave as a female. So for example, humans, our species, we consider us adult when we are 18 or 20 years old. And that makes that we learn a lot of things in our lifetime before we are adult human beings. But we consider a chimpanzee adult when they're 16. So they have a very slow development, and they learn a lot of things also from others. They also learn how to behave as a man or as a woman the same way that we do. And so gender is a concept that we can apply to the other apes. And so it's not just that we're dealing with sex differences, which are biological, but we're also dealing with gender differences when we talk about them. And that makes the picture so complex, is that they learn a lot of things, and there's indications that bonobos and chimpanzees also learn how to behave as males and females.
And for example, in our species, are some of those differences becoming more blurry? For example, now, and I like to speak from our North American point of view. Nowadays, especially with COVID, we find more men doing the laundry and the dishes, and we see more females doing jobs that have been mostly dominated by men. I am astonished every time that I see a woman driving a big construction truck, which I am seeing now more often. And really, we are in the 21st century, I'm still surprised, seeing a woman with a hard hat and a construction, I guess, uniform. So are those gender roles becoming blurry over time? Or I guess, no? Is that
So we are clearly a very flexible species. And that flexibility is very interesting. If you want to change society, let's say you want to change the relations between men and women, that flexibility is very important, that we have that. In the primates, I see the same thing. So since the primates also have a very long learning period, they have that flexibility. So, for example, people sometimes make fun, in the US, for example, people make fun about paternity leave. They say, but we don't need paternity leave because the women will take care of the kids, and the men don't need a leave when there's a baby that's born. They have that opinion. But, in the other primates, even though the males normally don't do much with offspring, it's the females who carry the babies and feed the babies and all of that. Sometimes there are orphans. Sometimes a mother loses her life. And we have observations from the field that show that males sometimes adopt these babies. So you may have an alpha male, even the highest ranking male of a chimpanzee group, who adopts a baby chimp because the mother has died and carries it around sometimes for 5 years. For years, they carry it around like a mother. They support them. They wait for them if they travel. And so these males, even though normally they don't do much with infants, they are capable of it. So that flexibility is really interesting. And I think we humans, we have a lot of flexibility. And that's why the gender concept is very interesting for me, because clearly there's more going on than just the sex differences. We also have the cultural differences going on.
And can you talk a little bit about the difference in mating? For example, as humans, we go to a club to look for a woman or try to seduce them. It's not politically correct, but at work or in other social gathering, and we like to make ourselves the most presentable and polite as we can in order to get the woman. And I always speak as the men getting the woman, which I don't know if that's cultural or biological, and how is that different from the chimpanzees or the bonobos?
Well, the fact that you always speak of the man getting the woman indicates that you think it's the man who's the more active part, and that, let's say, female sexuality is maybe passive. But, that's a view that in biology we are dropping at the moment, because we have all sorts of indications that females are sexually very active. So the female passivity, also in bonobos and bonobos for sure. Bonobos, they have sex in all combinations of individuals, in all sorts of positions. And females are very active in this regard, but also in the chimpanzee, I would say. And so in the human species, I don't think we should speak of a passive female sexuality. The females, especially when they're younger, they're very active in setting up meetings, and maybe men have the impression that they are the initiators always and in control, but that's not always the case, I would say.
Well, I don't know. Every time I went to a club, I felt like it was always me asking for the first dance or approaching the girl. But okay, how about there is a big disparity between there's income inequality between men and women, and one of the reasons that I hear often is that men are more aggressive asking for a salary increase. For example, they are more persistent, and I mean, this is one excuse that I hear often. So is this aggressiveness one of the reasons for income inequality between men and women?
Well, I don't know that. I think men are more assertive in general, especially if the other party is also a man, probably. And so, yeah, that's a possibility. But the idea that sometimes people have the idea that men are more competitive and that men are more hierarchical than women. That's not something that is necessarily supported. Females are quite competitive in all species that we know, and quite hierarchical also. So, for example, the word pecking order comes from hens, not from roosters. And so this whole idea that there are many differences that people postulate between the sexes that I'm not sure are well supported.
Okay. So, how about okay? I'm 55 years old now. You could say that I am old-fashioned, and as far as gender in my country, we used to see a man and a woman. Now I see all kind of in between genders, and then I wonder how much of that is also in other primates. How much in between there is.
Yeah, we have the same gender diversity, I think. So first of all, if you take biological sex, we often say sex is binary, male and female.
Right.
But actually, there is an in-between category of 1 or 2%. And that's true for many species, not just true for humans. But there is, so gender is not 100% binary, is mostly binary. If you go to gender is more complex because gender is a cultural construct. And so gender, I would not say that you have males and females. I would say you have masculine and feminine behavior in gender. So you have masculine and feminine, and you have everything in between. So gender is much more flexible, is really on a spectrum. And that's what you're seeing. If you look at society, you see different gender expressions. Now, in the other primates, I have very often seen males who are not typical in their behavior, who, for example, males who are not interested in dominance, males who are not interested in playing the politics of macho games. They stay out of it. They are not necessarily small males. They may be big, important males, but they just don't want to play that game. Or you have females. I describe in my book a female chimpanzee named Donna, who was very masculine in her behavior, who wanted to be with males. She looked like a male, she acted like a male, but she was clearly a female. And she was like this from very young. So I don't know, I cannot ask her gender identity, but she might be a trans female or trans male in this case. So I think if we start looking for it, we will find a very similar gender diversity in the other primates. And so at the moment, there is a lot of discussion about it in human society, of course, and people get very excited and sometimes very angry about all these possibilities that exist. But I think as a biologist, I'm not surprised. You know, in biology, we're very used to individual variation. You look at two trees of the same species in the same forest, and the two trees are totally different. We are very used that each individual is different. And that's what we're seeing at the moment in the gender discussion. We see that each individual is slightly different from the other one.
Well, among us humans, there is discrimination. I mean, gays have been discriminated against for many years, and we are in one of those most open societies. We don't even want to speak about some of those societies where being a gay is a crime. So we try to create that barrier among humans. I wonder if that happens between chimpanzees, for example. If male chimpanzees is perceived as quote unquote gay, are they isolated from the rest of the clan, or are they accepted as just one more different chimpanzee?
That's the interesting part, is that I think we see similar variation in them than we see in us, but they tolerate all of that. I've never noticed that they are intolerant. I've never noticed that they are aggressive to individuals who act like that. They just take them as they are. I think one problem with our species is that we are a language oriented, so we are a symbolic species, and we like to label everything. So you are a man, you are a woman, you are homosexual, you are hetero. We put labels on everything. And if you fall between the labels, you're out of luck because we don't know what to do with you. And we're intolerant We're intolerant to individuals who don't exactly fit where we want them to fit. And I think that's a problem of our species. But in the other primates, I don't see the same intolerance.
Right. And as far as us human, I mean, when there is a newborn, either a boy or a girl, or now there is something in between, I mean, when they are little kids, we treat them all the same. And we care about this. We don't see any difference. So first of all, at what age do we generally start treating them differently? And at what age do they feel themselves that they are different between, you know, a boy feels like, oh, I'm a boy, and a girl feels like I'm a girl?
I think we treat our babies from the start differently. We dress them in different colors as babies. And we talk differently about them, I think. We have different levels of tolerance of certain behaviors. So from the start, from the very beginning, we are sort of programming boys to act like boys and girls to act like girls. We push them in these directions. And that's why people get so extremely upset if they have a child, let's say, who is born as a boy, who after 3 years says, yeah, I feel that I'm more like a girl, you know? That's why people get extremely upset. And then, of course, most of them, fortunately, they get used to it and they start to support their child. But the society is not ready yet for that kind of flexibility. And so in the other primates also, I think for example, young males, they like to wrestle. That's the thing that they like the most. And they do it with each other all the time, but they also do it with adults sometimes. Now, the mothers are not so much into wrestling with their sons. The young males do that all the time. But for example, this female that we had, Donna, who was so male-like, when she was 3 years old, which is, you know, chimpanzees are very slow development, 3 years, they're very small. She wanted to play with males. And so she would approach adult males to wrestle with them, which young females never do. This is not a typical thing for young females to try that, certainly not with a fully adult male. But she would do that. And the males actually responded to her like she was different. They felt she was different. And so you have very early sex differences. Another sex difference that we have in the primates and in humans is that young females are interested in babies. And they're interested in dolls. If you give them a doll, if you give a doll to a chimpanzee, they will carry it, put it on their back, hold it against the nipple, nurse it. The females like to play with dolls, and they're very interested in infants. The males, if you give them a doll, well, they may take it apart because they're curious what's inside or something like that. They don't really play mother with it. But the young females are very interested in infants. They want to carry infants, hold them. And if they get older, then they become the babysitters for the adult females. So when they're older and better at it, the mothers will sometimes have them take care of the baby for a couple of hours. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I'm beginning to see a pattern. I wonder if we're coming to the end of the episode. I wonder, since I'm not an expert in this field, if I neglected to ask you anything more that you would like to bring up.
No, I think it's important to note that the things are much more complex than people think. People think biology is simple. You have males and females, and that's all very simple. And we in human society, we make it complex with cultural additions and so on. But I think if we look at the other primates, we see that there is an enormous gender diversity, and gender is a concept that is not just limited to our species.
And when we speak about gender, human gender, of course, we are looking at that through the lens of North America. If we look at traditions and behavior in other cultures, we may see also a great difference in their traditions and
that's exactly why gender is such a good concept. In addition to sex, is because if you look at human cultures, you see an enormous variability in this regard. Yeah.
Well, Frans, I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners find out more? I mean, you have written, I counted 16. Is that how many?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, the title of this book is Different, And the subtitle is Gender Through the Eyes of a Primatologist. And you can find it in the bookstores and at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and places like that. Yeah.
Well, when you wrote your last book, I thought that you would be retiring. At least I heard you saying that in another podcast. So I'm so glad you wrote another book. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.